I think if I was a wrestler, I would have a cool math thing. The derivative. There's this guy that was on The Real World, and he's a wrestler now. And on The Real World, he was all about he was going to be a wrestler. He had his own name called The Miz, and now he really is a wrestler. Like his dream came true.
Wow.
Is that true? 8 times 5 gives me 40. I'm just going to talk about math. I mean, talk about wrestling and just do the math without explaining it. That's so I could get my zeros, right? X equals 8, x equals negative 5. We've done that. Can we take that and translate that to a lovely graph? What do these represent on my graph? Yeah, the x-intercepts. I already found my x-intercepts. Could I find my y-intercept? How do we find a y-intercept? Set x equal to 0, so if this goes to 0 and this goes to 0, I would get negative 40 as my y-intercept. Almost, but I didn't make that go very far a bit. Oh, yeah. Oh. So I grab paper towels. I do. But I don't want to use it because I'm going to make my y-axis go by tens. You okay with that? So if you ever want to make your axis go by something other than ones, make sure you label it. Because if you don't label it, I'm going to grade it as if it goes by ones. If we graph our intercepts, is that going to be enough to get a good sketch of this graph? Negative 5, 8, negative 40. Is negative 40 going to be the vertex of that graph? Relatively, but not really, right? Because it's not in the center. Because one side's 5 over and one side's 8 over. So maybe we should pick another point and see what happens? Or maybe we want to talk about how we find the vertex? Remember anything about vertex of a quadratic equation? If you have ax squared plus bx plus c, there's a formula for the vertex that you could do vertex form. We don't do that yet. Or we can just use an equation, which is negative b over 2a. That was on your formula sheet for your ECA. I was given to you. Probably don't remember it. And then you have to plug that in to find the y coordinate. Or Lorenzo taught me that there's actually a formula for it, but I forget what it is. So I always say it's f of negative b over 2a. The ugly part about that is this vertex is going to be a fraction. If I did negative b over 2a, that would be 3 over 2 times 1, which means my vertex is at 1 1/2. And then if I want to find the y coordinate that goes with that, I'm just going to plug that in on my fancy calculator. Three halves. Where do I plug it in to find the y value that goes with it? Where would I plug in the x coordinate to find the y value that goes with it? If I was making an xy chart and I gave you an x value, where do you plug it in to find the y value? The equation. So I'm plugging it in right here. I got negative 42.25. You're welcome. I did all the work for you. 10's here, so that really shouldn't be very far away.
So if you mark off, we just do the 1.5.
Did I not do 1.5? It was supposed to be 1.5, but yeah. What about absolute value? What kind of graph is absolute value graph? A V-shaped graph. So I call this the parent graph, because all the other graphs go from it. But absolute value, remember, always means positive. So if you graph an absolute value, when you plug in a positive number, you just get the same positive number back. So when you plug in 0, you get 0. Plug in 1, you get 1. When you plug in 2, you get 2. But the same thing happens when you plug in negative numbers, because if you plug in -1, the absolute value is still +1. -2, the absolute value is +2. So you need to know, just like a quadratic is a parabola, that absolute value is a V-shaped graph. And then if you know that, then you can graph transformations of it. So then I have to Can I go? Talk about wrestling some more? Oh look, I had a thing for us to do. Dang it. It's alright. It's fine. We'll do it without it. I thought I made one up, but then I thought I didn't. I even looked through it. So look, I had computer surgery. You were gonna graph it online. I even put a graph on there for you.
Oh, we should go get the laptops. Oh, we got 20 minutes. We're fine.
Go. If you want to get it, you can. If you just want to do it on paper, you can just do it on paper.
Yeah. So like it was.
Yeah, why not? Negative b over 2a. So that just means like f of that. So that's like the coordinate, right? So like, so this is supposed to be like the coordinate. So this would be x. So f of that would be plug that into equation. Does that make sense? So like, if I said like f of 2, you plug it in. So this is my order, and this is the x coordinate. The y coordinate is just plug in. If you're doing this on the computer or by hand, one thing you can do is you can make an XY chart. You know it's a V-shaped graph, so that means you need to pick numbers until you get that V-shaped graph. Or maybe we can talk about what some strategies are so that every time you can get kind of that turning point without having to just pick a million numbers. As soon as you get the same Y value twice, then you hit that B and that you can see that it's there. So we'll see if this works. So I put this under the class code. This is where we tried to join last time and you all joined someone else's class. Remember that? Yeah. So I tried it again. So we're going to try. If you do this, it should say you're joining my class. But if it says you're not joining my class, I will just do something else. Does anybody tell me when you get there? Quick code at the top. You should be able to type that in. But it's supposed to say you join my class. And if you join my class, then I have an assignment set up for this. But we'll see. Well, my goal is how many different sites can we go to in the same day? Today's 3. Google Classroom. Soccer day.
I've already signed up for those.
You have, but you don't. You can just type your name in every time. Like, you can just hit quick code at the top. Go to the very top, and it has a code. Well, so then just sign in. You can use your Google stuff. So see, like I'm already signed in. But if you hit quick code, does it ask you for that silly? Go.
What was that code?
Mine just shows for all this stuff. Only students can do that, it says. Has anybody got this to work yet?
Yes, I'm joining.
WKHD396. pencil, paper and pencil.
Yay! It says here, ma136.
Okay, so now click on ma136 and you should see assignments.
Okay, there's a dog that's. It's got 2.3 notes, 2.3 day 2 notes, and then check for understanding.
2.3 day 2 notes is what you want to click on. No,
This question isn't on there, but
this isn't on there. Where the number?
9x squared minus 30x plus 25 is
What? Are you sure?
number 4. Day 3, 2.3 day 2 notes.
3.2 day 2. And look, I put this lovely graph for you. Basically what they keep saying. Then look, did you find it?
It's loading.
I just wanted to kind of practice seeing how awful it was to graph on here. If you are going to just pick numbers for this, so if you are going to make an XY chart with your trackpad there, if you picked 0 for X, you would get 1 plus 2, which is 3. If you picked 1 for X, you would get 0 plus 2, which is 2. If you picked 2 for X, 2 minus 1 is 1 plus 2, which is 3 again.
Whatever you write is really combined with what I write.
Oh wait, it's because I'm on edit, dang it.
I was trying to write over all your stuff.
Look, now it's in there for you, now everyone can see it.
I was trying to cover over it.
So if I graphed that 0, 3, 1, 2, 2, 3, once you get that it turned back up, that's a V shape. You don't have to keep going from there. But remember, you have to know the shape. It's not a quadratic. So it's going to go out just like this, right? It's not going to turn and be a U shape. It's going to be a V shape. What are some tips we could do to help us pick this? Pick what makes your absolute value go to 0, and that will give you that point, that turning point. So like I knew right away that 1 was going to be my turning point because that's what makes my absolute value go to 0. Also, if you remember anything about transformations, which we'll review again later in this unit, but if you remember anything about transformations, the number inside is a move left or right. So the normal graph starts at 0, 0. That minus 1 means it's moved over 1. The plus 2 means it's moved up 2. So if you remember that, that's some easy ways to help you graph as well. It's slow. That's not good. Cats can hear ultrasound. That's true. Okay. You can shut this, but you can stay logged in if you want, because I think we'll do another one. Is there another question on there? That's you don't know. Okay.
Oh, there's
Okay, here's some stuff that we didn't do yesterday, and you've talked about equations of circles before, but if you haven't taken pre-cal, that means it's been since geometry since you've talked about equations of circles, probably. Just shut it. So if you had a circle and you had this point out here that we can call X and Y, the point in the middle is the center. We're going to call that H and K. And if you measure from the center to a point on the circle, that is going to be the radius of the circle. So using a point on the circle, the center of the circle, and the radius of the circle, you can actually do some Pythagorean theorem to get where this equation comes from. If you drew it over and made a triangle. But the standard equation of a circle is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. You have to know that equation for our test and probably for the quiz. Where the center is at hk and r equals your radius. you could solve that for r if you wanted by taking the square root of both sides. I don't think I put that there. If you just took the square root of both sides, you would get the square root of x minus h squared plus y minus k squared. Notice it's not plus or minus because radius is a distance, and so that distance there is always going to be positive. That should kind of look vaguely familiar as the distance formula. Like that's where the, I mean, we just changed it to x1 and x2. Like that's the distance formula, the distance between 2 points. In your homework, when it says find the equation of a circle, this is usually the one that we want, right? The standard equation of a circle. So notice I'm not going to start with an easy question here. They're not going to just give you the center and the radius and say write the equation. They're going to make you do some work. And so I picked specific questions that Ivy Tech told me I should be picking to do here. So these types of questions will probably show up. So it says find an equation of a circle with a center at -2, 3, and it contains the point 4, 5. That means we have to figure out what r is, yes? So if they give me the center, that's my h and my k. They give me a point, that's my x and my y. I can just plug that in and solve for r. You can use either one of those equations to solve for r, and then you'll go back and write your equation. Don't subtract from them, that happens a lot. So I tend to work with the top one. So I'm going to say 4 minus -2 squared plus 5 minus 3 squared equals r squared. So 6 squared is 36, plus 2 squared is 4, so r squared equals 40. Yes, we could take the square root of that, but we want to write the equation. And in our equation, it's r squared, so you don't need to say the square root of 40 and simplify it, because we can just plug that in. So what would my answer look like? An equation that has the center of this and a radius squared of 40 would be x minus -2 squared plus y minus 3 squared equals my radius squared, which is 40. Right, because we didn't solve for, like, it would be the square root of 40 squared. How do you feel about that? I feel like we're never going to get to these notes. Just so you know, I have a lot of examples like that. Yeah, you can sign off. What about this one? Find the center and the radius of the circle with this equation. So this is my equation I want, but instead of having something squared, this is what I have. I have 3x squared and a minus 12x. I have 3y squared and a plus 18y. How do I take something like this that's not squared and make it something squared? How do I take something that's an incomplete square and make it a complete square? You have to complete the square. Because you have to make this squared. You have to make it x minus a number squared. Yeah, you got to complete the square 2 times. But it's not that bad. It looks kind of scary. But can I divide everything by 3 first? I don't just want. I have to do it because you can't complete the square if there's a number in front of your x and y. So let's divide everything by 3 with a big old division bar. And I would get x squared minus 4x, leave a space to complete the square, plus y squared plus 6y, leave a space, half of the middle number squared. So half of negative 4 is negative 2, squared is positive 4. Half of 6 is 3, 3 squared is 9. Am I good? And whatever you do to this side, you have to do to this side. So we have to add a 4 and a 9 over here. Yes? Home stretch now. You should now be able to write this as something squared times something squared equals 16. There's our equation. Well, what do I put in there? Yeah, it's half of the middle number. So remember that's a negative 4. So that would be x minus 2 squared, half of 6, y plus 3 squared. So if they give you something that's not in standard form, you might have to complete the square. Okay. Oh, you don't have to write all this out. Should have printed your notes out, huh? What if I wanted just half of the circle? Do you agree that there are 4 halves to a circle? That kind of sounds tricky, right? You think there's only 2 halves, right? Circle. That would be like the top half, right? Or the bottom half, or the right half, or the left half. That's a D. We can write equations for each of these. Why would you just want half of a circle? Well, you didn't have this part here, right? If you just had the circle itself, part, not the diameter going through it. Do you agree that the top half and the bottom half are functions, like they pass the vertical line test? That's why we like them, because they pass the vertical line test. So I want you to write this part, all right? I think that's kind of important. If you want to find the upper or lower half, all you have to do is solve that equation for y, and then whether you put the positive or the negative root gives you the upper or the lower half. Maybe you should write this too. X squared plus y squared equals 81. I'm going to show you an example here. There's all this in your book, so you can look at it to get more details. But it's not that hard to solve this for y. If I solve this equation for y, I would get y squared equals 81 minus x squared. Then I would take the square root of both sides, and I would get y equals plus or minus, so I could get the positive 81 minus x squared, or I could get the negative square root of 81 minus x squared. So remember that a radical equation was like half of a parabola? If you have a radical equation with a square under it, then that's going to be half of a circle. This is the top half. This is the bottom half. And we could do the same thing to find the left and the right halves. You just solve for x. So then you're going to have y squared under it. So that's going to give you the left half, which is negative, or the right half, which is positive. So if I solve that for x, so I get x equals the square root of 81 minus y squared, or x equals negative square root of 81 minus y squared. There's one more thing that I wanted to talk about that I didn't, and we can talk about it tomorrow, but I also want to tell you where you can find it in your book before we talk about it, is tangency, a point of tangency to a circle. You learned in geometry, but it was a long time ago. A tangent line is a line that touches your graph in only one point. So if they talk about a tangent line to a circle, it means it only touches it at one point. And so there's a question on this review, and we can, or not on this review, on this worksheet, and we can talk about it more tomorrow. But no, on page 137, it talks about tangent lines. And if you know the definition of that, and I tell you that a circle is tangent to the x-axis, that means you can figure out how far away it is from the x-axis. It's going point. There's a level of picture that goes with that. There's only one question on here about that, and we can talk about it tomorrow. If we do it together. But here's your homework. Probably we're going to turn this in tomorrow. So that means do it.
Really?
I think we don't.
So I have some graphing on there on the front. On the back, I have write some equations. Number 7 is the tangent one, so you have to think about that one. Number 9 is something to square, and number 10 is talking about semicircles. We'll go over questions on this tomorrow. We'll turn it in.